Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on what coast you're on. I am so excited to have you joining today. My name is Carrie Scott. I work at Spruce Health. Some of you may be familiar with me as I moderate these every month. But for those of you who are new and joining, welcome. I'm so excited for our topic today and for our speaker. Just as a little reminder, we're going to be talking about building a leadership team to support your group practice, basically scalable growth through sustainable leadership. And Maureen is going to talk about this because she has done this and she has built some pretty incredible stuff and learned how to monetize group practices and enjoy the income that brings, along with the freedom and peace of mind. So with that, let's just quickly intro Spruce to those of you who might be new to Spruce. And this is just a 10-second little thing here. Spruce is a HIPAA grade cloud-based communication platform. It integrates business phone system with texting and faxing and telemedicine. And it does that, and it ultimately optimizes care collaboration for you, for your team. It streamlines the interactions that you have with your care team and with your patients, and it ensures accountability while basically delivering the outcomes that most of us are looking for. So that is a nutshell, real tight version of what Spruce is. I encourage you to dip on over to our website if you haven't. We have a free 2-week trial, etc. you can look into. But this is not about Spruce today. This is about Maureen and what she is going to share with you. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and then take over from here. I'm going to turn my video off, but I will be answering your questions. And just some real quick housekeeping. We've disabled the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. It gets a little bit noisy, but we have the Q&A feature at the bottom and encourage you to drop in your questions as you think of them. We will take them as we go. Maureen does have a full plate for you today, though, so we're going to probably use the whole hour. If for some reason you have to drop off or you miss something, the session is being recorded, and I will be sharing the link later today. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I'm passing the torch, and I'll jump back on when questions come in. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to hear about you and what you're going to share.
Thank you. And like Carrie said, I enjoy getting questions throughout my presentation. So if you ever have a question, put it in the Q&A section, and Carrie will make sure to interrupt me if a question comes up. So about me, my name's Maureen Werrbach. I am a group practice owner. I have a group practice called Urban Wellness in Chicago with 4 locations and many, many therapists and nurse practitioners and other provider types. I've had that since 2012, so just about 14 years. I'm obviously a speaker and a group practice business strategist through my other business, the Group Practice Exchange, where I love helping people start and scale their group practices. And I also have a podcast on this topic as well. And I like to think of myself as in my role in my group practice as a visionary. I'll talk a little bit about what that means because it's an important part of a leadership team. I'm a creator, an ideas generator. That's sort of where my zone of genius is like thinking outside of the box and creating things. So we're going to be talking about leadership teams and building that. So I want to start first by just talking a little bit about what some of the business benefits are in group practice in creating a leadership team. One of the most important ones, I think, is that you really get to start to share in the leader load. If you're a smaller group practice or a new group practice, it's very likely that you are wearing all the hats and are leading in all aspects of the business, and it can get really lonely when you're in that role alone. And so creating a team of people who help lead your business is one way to really share in that leader load so that you don't feel alone in what you're creating and you can have support. The second thing that I find to be really important is that it creates growth opportunities. For those of you that have a group practice, you might have noticed in the past year or so that recruiting new clinicians is not as easy as it once was. And we're seeing a lot of different things that are playing into that. But one of the things that supports clinician Retention is when there are growth opportunities for those clinicians to diversify their workload so that they aren't burnt out by doing one-on-one after another after another. So a really successful business can provide opportunities for your employees to grow so that they don't actually outgrow your business and move on. The third thing is that it improves support and goal measures. So a business with more leaders and smaller teams means that there are bottleneck issues that can be rectified sooner when you have more leaders that are accountable to specific things. Also, leadership teams are scalable, right? You can't do it all. What you were able to do when you were a 2-person group practice, 4-person group practice, 7-person group practice doesn't work at 15, at 20, at 40, at 50, right? At some point, having a leadership team is going to be necessary. And so it's something that makes your business scalable is having a leadership team. And then lastly, and this is something that's just important to me specifically, is that it helps you create a legacy, right? I guess my hope for my business, and I'm assuming is the hope for your businesses if you're group practice owners, is that you want to be able to create something that can live beyond you, where the business doesn't live and die with you. And having a leadership team that can take the reins so that your business isn't solely reliant on you is one big step in being able to create a legacy in your practice. So those are the business benefits. There are also some personal benefits. One I mentioned, which is just being able to share in the decision making and including ownership of outcomes. When you have people in leadership and they're accountable to specific action items or things in their role, what accountability means is that they're owning the outcome of the things that they're in charge of. Meaning if the outcome isn't great, they're in charge of figuring out what will rectify that, right? And so when you're able to share in decision making, not everything is on your shoulders. You're able to remove yourself from a linchpin position, which essentially just means that like if every decision has to fall through you first before it can be made, you're the linchpin, you're the thing that is creating a bottleneck that stops your other leaders from being able to make decisions when you're not around. It also helps you create a legacy that can live beyond you and gives you back time for you to do the things that you love, whether that means starting other businesses like I have in TGPE, whether it's spending just more time at home, spending time doing projects, other things that aren't work related. When you bring on a leadership team and you're able to step back in some of those ways, it gives you time back. Some of the common struggles that I do see when practice owners begin to bring leaders on, and in those first couple of years, as leaders are trying to really, get to know what their role is and get comfortable in that leadership capacity, I've seen, and these things are struggles that I've had and struggles that I've seen with other practices, is just one, becoming okay with sharing power, that you no longer have the sole say in how things go in your business, right? The point of leadership is that they're making important decisions. If they have to go to you every time or before they have to make a decision, they're really not leading, they're like middle managing, right? And so one of the common struggles initially that practice owners have is feeling like they're sharing in decision-making power. And alongside that is feeling like maybe leaders aren't making the exact decisions you would make, and learning how to be okay with your leadership team finding their way to making the right decisions, right? We have to think about when we own our business, by the time we bring leadership teams on, we've been running our business probably at least a few years. And a lot of things might at this point feel second nature to you in terms of business ownership and leadership. And when new leaders step in, they need some time to like marinate in that leadership capacity to like really grow into themselves. And so a lot of practice owners initially have difficulty just not wanting to step in to like fix problems that the leader might be making. And one of the best growth opportunities you can give is letting them find their way to the good space, right? The second thing is feeling unimportant, and that might not be a great word for it, but like feeling not needed, and then feeling like, well, why am I needed? Why am I even here? Look at this business. And this is like the other end of a really positive coin of if your leadership team doesn't need you as much anymore and the business is running, which means you're creating a legacy that allows your business to thrive without your presence all the time. The flip side of that coin is sometimes feeling like, what does this say about me if I'm not always needed? And that's something that I think a lot of business owners in general, but group practice owners end up having to work through once they bring on leaders. Um, Having to let go of how things happen and that they're not happening exactly the way you want. I sort of mentioned that already. And then not being able to give all the answers. And I think that's a really common struggle is when you bring leaders on, they're going to look to you for support and answers to some of their struggles. And sometimes you're not going to be able to have all the answers because we don't know it all. And so a lot of this is mindset stuff that practice owners have to deal with and that struggle with when they start to bring on a leadership team.
Hey, Maureen,
Yes.
a couple of quick questions that have come in, if now is a good time. The first one is from Nikki. She loves GPE and says hello. She's asking about how many clinicians before a practice is ready for a site supervisor typically.
Okay. Great question. Um, I'm going to go into the next slide. Wait, can go to the next question because the next slide, I'm going to be answering some of Nikki's question. What's the next question?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
The next one is from an anonymous attendee wanting a better understanding of your system for evaluating compensation as the practice grows. Is there a structure or plan in place for increasing pay for team members who step into leadership roles, especially as the scope of work expands? For example, if someone is paid 30 an hour when managing 5 therapists, now the team has grown to 8, is there a process for adjusting the pay to reflect that increased responsibility?
I will say that the best thing that you can have in your business that is a part of your leadership team is someone who is accountable to finance, who can help you make this decision. So I also don't make any decisions in my group practice without someone on my leadership team being a person that helps me make that decision. So when it comes to compensation, I have a fractional CFO, which is Green Oak Accounting, and Julie, my CFO, will literally be a part of making the decision around what compensation needs to be had. So I can tell you what we do, but I don't think that that means that it should flow automatically to you guys because it really depends. I get this question all the time, and I get that this is a hard, like people want like an exact answer to this, but compensation is going to look different. I'm in Illinois. My average reimbursement rates are around 150. I just had a coaching call with someone in Denver, and her average reimbursement rates were 250, right? So we're a whole $100 per session different. Her like what she can compensate a person on her leadership team is going to look really different than what I can compensate based off of what our reimbursements are. Because remember, anyone on our admin team, anyone on our clinical leadership team, the way we can pay them, the way we can pay anyone in our business is always going to be based off of the revenue that our clinicians bring in, right? We're a group practice. All of our revenue comes from client facing therapists doing therapy. And so a big portion of how we can figure out what our compensation for leadership teams is going to be based off of one, what our revenue is, client revenue is, but two is what is our total compensation. So I like to talk more about total compensation than someone's like direct pay that goes into their paycheck because one practice can offer no benefits but pay $80,000 in a salary for someone to see clients and maybe lead a few people, whereas another person might offer 6 weeks of paid time off, 1 week of sick time, pay 100% of health insurance for that clinician or that leader, and maybe only be able to then pay $60,000 instead of 80. But when you look at that total compensation package, which includes all the benefits that you as a business owner are paying for, those two might actually total compensation come out to $80,000. This is why in that answer, I would say having a CFO, a person who can look at your literal finances and how your current compensation structure and benefits package looks is going to give you an idea of how much you can pay leaders. The way I do it is I don't pay more for like more people that they're leading, right? Your question was around if they're supervising or leading a team of 5 and then in a year they're leading a team of 10, do you pay them more? No, what I do is The leadership role, for example, the site supervisor is, and for my practice, is $100,000. Is their salary, and then they have a whole bunch of benefits. That when we have them leading, we know what their max capacity can be. So my site supervisors, we look at the location, how many offices there are, how many rooms there are. We know they can supervise up to X amount of people. Now it might be less than that, but we figure out how many administrative or like supervisory hours they need when they hit that max capacity. And we are paying that $100,000 and saying instead, let's say they're only supervising 5 people, we're saying instead of seeing 25 clients, you can see 23 clients a week, and you have about 4 extra hours to do supervisory related stuff. And as new hires come in, we're just reducing the amount of clinical sessions that they're seeing, but keeping the salary the same. That's how we do it.
That's awesome, Maureen. Thank you so much for that. A couple more questions have come in, but I'm going to hold on those for now because I don't want to have you not get through your content. And we will get through these questions either at the end, or Maureen, you and your team will have access to them and can circle back later.
Sure. And also, I feel like there might be some questions that actually get answered as I talk to.
I think that's right.
Okay. So, and then going back to uh, the first person's question, I'm forgetting who it was.
Nikki,
Nikki, she's talking about what was her question? It was around the
about
site
how
supervisor.
many clinicians before a practice is ready for a site supervisor?
Okay. So you're thinking site supervisor in the way I'm labeling it site director on here, but it means someone who is supervising a location, maybe not necessarily providing hourly clinical supervision to every single person, like if they're fully licensed people there, but literally ensuring that the clinical team at that location is seeing the caseload that they're supposed to, getting notes done on time, doing any sort of supervision that might be needed. I guess I am very, I take more risk than maybe the average business owner. So that my answer is gonna depend on how much risk you're willing to take. I tend to be more proactive, so I'm willing to spend ahead of time before a thing becomes an issue, where other people are maybe a little bit more risk averse. And so they will bring on a clinical director, a site director, whatever leader position we're talking about here. They'll do it once they feel personally that they're at max capacity and they need to hand it off. I tend to do the opposite, where I will bring people into leadership to prepare for the growth that will allow those leaders to be working full time, right? So I mean, if you have a location, it already means you can have a supervisor. When I started my own group practice, my first location, I brought in a clinical director when there were only 3 of us, me, the clinical director, and one other therapist. So she wasn't clinically directing me or herself. That means there was only one person in the practice that could need any sort of supervisory support. And I just knew it wasn't something I wanted to do. So you can start right away with it. It depends on your own goals. So for me, I didn't want to provide supervision. I wanted to be able to focus on the business side of it. I was still also seeing clients. And so I brought someone in, and she was just doing like a couple of hours every week in the beginning. And I talked with her and had said 14 years ago, because I did it right away, that I was like, this is going to be a role that grows and evolves. Obviously, there's only one other person here, so this clinical director role is not super robust, but you'll grow with it. And she loved the idea of sort of molding that role as the business grew. And now, we're over 50 something clinicians, and have a whole big leadership team. So I wanted to share, just along those lines, what defines a leadership team. I wrote a book called The Accountability Equation, and all of this is in there, and it goes into much more detail on this. But all group practices have the same, everything that's in the yellow box here, this first 2 rows, that is what I consider a leadership team. We all have it, whether we have people in those roles or not, right? If we're a new group practice or a small group practice, you might be all of these people, right? You might be the sales and marketing, the person that's in charge of sales and marketing. You might be in charge of administrative or HR or clinical operations. You might be in charge of DEI and finance. You also might be the visionary and the integrator. The integrator is the person that is like more the boots on the ground person that's making sure all the different departments are working with each other, that all the accountabilities across the business are getting done. That might be you in all those roles. And if you're anything like me, when I had a smaller practice, I wasn't doing any intentional sales and marketing. I wasn't doing any intentional HR operations at the time, but nobody else was in that role. And if nobody else is in that role, it means that it falls on you. Whether you're intentionally engaging in that work or not, doesn't matter. So, visionary and integrator are the two top positions in a group practice. A lot of times, someone who's a co-owner will one will be a visionary and one will be an integrator. And or you might hire someone like I did in my group practice. I have someone who's in an integrator position right now. So a visionary, I put a little box here for what that means. A visionary is someone who is in thought leadership. It's someone who is engaging in thinking about what new streams of income could be used in the group practice, right? Based off of like the trends and what's happening in our industry. Someone who's in the visionary role is looking at relationship building or any sort of major partnerships in the community, right? They're the ones that define the practice culture. They're not necessarily going to be the ones that are engaging in the day-to-day active culture setting. That's what the leaders are there for, but the leaders need to know what that practice culture should be that they're modeling. The visionary is also doing any sort of research, keeping a pulse on the industry. That's what I spend most of my time is looking at like what's going on in our industry. What are we seeing coming down the pipeline? What do I need to prepare for? How do I maybe need to pivot in my business, right? We've seen this past year that retention has been a little bit more difficult. Hiring has taken a little bit more time than average. People are getting less new client inquiries. And so looking at from a visionary perspective is looking at how can we fix that? What ways do I maybe need to pivot or does my business need to pivot in order for those things to work? The integrator, on the other hand, is the person who's boots on the ground. I'm forgetting what his name is. He's the author, Gino Wickman, the author of Traction. He calls the integrator the glue that holds the business together. And so the integrator is making sure that all these little departments or the people that are in charge of and accountable for these areas, that they're doing what needs to be done, that they're communicating with each other, that there's integration among the departments. So you'll see I have these top two rows as what I define a leadership team in a group practice to be. Now, like I said, it might be that you're in all of those positions. And it might be that you have maybe someone who, like a clinical director who's in charge of all clinical operations. Maybe you have a fractional CFO like I do. Maybe you have like a head of admin that typically those are like the three roles that tend to be initially hired out for. But what is nice about this is that I like to share this with my whole group practice because they get to see what it actually takes to run a group practice, right? Because a lot of times a clinician or an admin isn't going to be able to really understand what it means to run a business. They only can see what they can see. But also, when you start to plop in who is really accountable in these leadership roles, and then everything below here is non-leadership, right? Those are additional bookkeeper, someone who's in charge of accounts receivable, for example. These are all ones that you might have more or less people doing, depending on how large your practice is. But what I like to do is share this because then the clinicians and the admin in your practice can see where there are gaps, where your name is showing up, where in an ideal world, you eventually get to where you can do what is your zone of genius, which I'm assuming is visionary since you envisioned a practice and built it. And it allows your team to be able to see where they might be able to fit in themselves in that leadership role. And if we talk about creating growth opportunities, this is one way where they can see a potential for growth opportunities in the future for themselves. So when you're implementing your leadership growth strategy, you need to understand your core leadership roles in your group practice. What are the roles that are common in our industry? These are the ones. Be able to assess your specific need. I know a lot of people will probably be asking in the chat like what they should hire for in terms of leadership first. You need to be able to evaluate your practice's specific leadership needs right now and in the next year-ish, right? If you're at a 10-person practice and you have maybe a clinical director, your assessing your leadership needs might mean looking at what is it that you're doing right now in the leadership capacity that is not a strong suit of yours. For me, one of the first things that I hired out for in leadership was my clinical director and then my head of admin, because those were two areas that were not a strong suit for me. Some of you, and I've worked with a lot of group practices where they actually like to provide supervision. And so maybe that first leadership role that person's going to want to hire for isn't going to be a clinical role. It's going to be maybe an administrative role because they don't want to do admin work. Or maybe it's going to be something else, right? Training, empowering, and creating accountability. Here's where a lot of practice owners get stuck. They get really excited. They start to bring on people into leadership roles. And then what they realize is that they haven't set up a structure for accountability. I know you, Carrie, you were talking about accountability also in your Spruce slide. But to build a true leadership team, it means that you're giving them full accountability in their role and in the responsibilities that they have so that they're not continuously coming back to you. When that happens, I like to see that as middle management, right? If they can't fully do that role without having to default to you and check in with you all the time, you've really just put them in this like middle manager role and not a real leadership role. And then, of course, because our businesses adjust and grow and evolve, you want to make sure that you're setting up a schedule with yourself. I like to do it once a year where I'm assessing my leadership team's success, making sure that they've been following through on their accountabilities, that they're feeling like they're actually leading and owning the results of their department or of their role. So when we think about a clinician that we have in our group practice and potentially bringing them into a leadership position, this is a very common thing. And there are some common challenges that practice owners notice when they want to shift a clinician into a leadership role. One is clinician turned leaders might face resistance from former peers who sees them as like one of us, right? If you have a clinician working at a location who then shifts to a supervisor position, and now that person is supervising what was their peers, that's a common obstacle or challenge that is faced in bringing an existing clinician into a leadership role. The other struggle, and something that I want to like hammer into all of it, if we can leave this training and just remember this, is that great clinicians don't equal great leaders. I've made this mistake, and I think probably 80% of group practice owners will say that they've made this mistake, which is that they have a clinician who's really great, and they made the assumption that as they shift over into a leadership role, that they'll just naturally lead well because they're great clinicians. And it's just not the case. It's two very different skill sets. Leading with a business in mind. So a lot of clinicians, when they are shifting into a leadership role, they are used to doing their work with themselves in mind, not the business. As a clinician, they're not in leadership. And so when they shift over to being a leader, whether it's a clinical director, a site supervisor, or any one of those positions, they are going to have to shift their mentality to having the business in mind when they're making decisions, the business health as a whole, rather than thinking only from a clinical or clinician lens. Harnessing the leader's strengths when creating a leadership role. Co-creating positions, I think, is a great thing to do. So if there is a clinician that you have who has really strong leadership skills, starting to think about how you can co-create a position that is a best fit for them, that takes their skills into accountability, is going to be a really helpful way to not sort of like pigeonhole them into accepting a leadership position where maybe not all of their strengths are showing up in there. So some keys to success is around communication, training, teaching new leaders how to set boundaries and communicate expectations without damaging relationships. I see this being a common concern when clinicians shift to leader. They get a little bit irritated when they're trying to change their relationship with their team members. Self-awareness being another one, leaders showing up on how they're reflecting on how their tone, their timing, their actions align with their leadership expectations. I like to tell leaders to like think about what is your leadership style? being intentional about their style of leadership and also communicating what their leadership style is to their team so their team can better understand them. The delegation decision tree, I love this, and I've talked about this for like all 10 years that I've had my group practice. And I can't take ownership of the decision tree. I read a book a million years ago, and I don't know who wrote it. If anyone ever finds it, it's a super old book. But essentially, this has been really helpful for me when it comes to delegating to leaders or delegating to anyone, like an intake person, a new admin person, is how we can ensure that we're delegating, meaning giving away ownership of whatever we're delegating. If we, a lot of times we think we're delegating when really, as Mike Michalowicz likes to say, you're just the decider. They're doing tasks, but they keep coming back to you to make sure that they're doing it right. Or if it doesn't go well, they'll be like, what should I do next? You're the decider. You're an active part of that job still, and you haven't actually delegated it. So the decision tree or the delegation decision tree essentially talks about leaf level, branch level, trunk level, and root level decisions. So leaf level decisions are decisions that can be made without you 100% of the time. So that, as an example, could be an intake person, one who's been trained, who's been in your practice, right? Being able to answer a phone and schedule an appointment. That I would consider a leaf level decision. They do not need to come to you to let you know who they scheduled with after each person is scheduled. And again, this is after training and all that. That's the leaf level decisions. Branch level decisions are things that can be made without you, again, but you might be notified of the changes on like a quarterly basis or a monthly basis. A good example of this might be a clinical director who gives a PIP to a performance improvement plan. Maybe they give a performance improvement plan, a clinical director does, to another clinician. They make the decision based off of their skills and their knowledge and their role. They did give a PIP, but maybe at the next monthly leadership meeting, they're letting you know that they've given a PIP to X, Y, and Z, right? They don't have to come to you first to make sure you're okay with it because it's a branch level decision. But they're going to let you know at the next meeting that they have with you just so that you're aware. Next is going to be decisions that have to be made collaboratively with you. And those are trunk level decisions, right? And so that typically tends to be decisions that happen across a leadership team. I'm trying to think of one good example for this one. Decisions that are collaborative, like maybe starting a new marketing effort, right? Maybe the person who's in charge of sales and marketing has thought up a great new marketing method. It's going to cost $2,000 a month. They're going to make that decision collaboratively with you because the financial piece they need approval on, right? So it happens collaboratively. And then lastly is root level decisions. And those are decisions that almost can make or break your business. And so they're only made by you. And that typically oftentimes is financial based. Maybe it's opening another location, right? Maybe you are the one making that decision. There's no one else that's going to make that decision. Or maybe it's closing down a location, right? We see a lot of group practice owners right now downsizing. And so those tend to be root level decisions because they can shake the core of the tree, so to speak. So I like to share this not only in leadership, but in owning a business as a whole and delegating any task in your practice is if you're noticing that people are coming to you all the time on decisions that you feel like you've delegated out, ask yourself, are the things that they're asking or coming back to me for, are those branch level or leaf level decisions? And if so, it means you can have a conversation with them and say, actually, these are the kind of decisions that I feel confident you can make on your own without me. And if they're not feeling confident, there might need to be a little bit of training and coaching. Whereas if there's some decisions that are being made down here where they're coming to, then it makes a lot of sense. So I just like sharing this tree. So when we think about growth opportunities for your leadership team, there's a few things I like to think about. One is combining passions. what other passions do your staff have that fit in with the vision and culture of your business? So I've made some decisions in my business, in my group practice, when it comes to leadership, where one example is one of my site supervisors, Nick. He's been with us for like 6 or 7 years. He has a double master's in one, he's an LMFT, and then he also has a degree in, I'm going to get it wrong, not videography, but like video arts photography. And he had said at one point, like, my ideal world would be somehow combining those two things. And when I looked at some of the things that I was outsourcing, one of those was doing our staff photos, having our clinicians do bio videos. We have bio videos on their bio pages, our social media, right? And I realized we can combine a passion of his with his clinical work, his leadership, and with the creative side that he wants to be able to incorporate. For him, that was like his ideal world, and we were able to do that. So thinking about that with your own team, how can you create a unique opportunity for your team that they can't get elsewhere? I think that's really the key right now. While there's like big tech getting into the group practice world and potentially able to pay more than a small brick and mortar like our business is, where we can stand out is by having unique opportunities that they can't get elsewhere, like this. When we think about bringing people into leadership, I had mentioned a slide or two ago, if the one thing you remember in this whole training is great clinicians don't always equal great leaders. I want to reference the idea of rock stars and superstars. If you want to read more about it, Kim Scott wrote a book called Radical Candor that talks about these two concepts. And it's really helped me be able to make better decisions around who should be in leadership and who shouldn't. So a superstar is someone, like, think growth oriented, like superstar going into the sky, right? They seek growth and challenges. They tend to be the ones that will lead to start their own solo practices. They're always wanting growth and challenge and movement, right? Think of that, the ladder, so to speak. Whereas rock stars, think of like rock solid. They're not moving. They value stability. They value consistency. They want to be great at what they do, and they want to be seen for being great at what they do, but they don't necessarily want growth. And a lot of times, business owners like us will see rock stars who are doing great work, right? Great clinician, and assume that they'd be great fit to lead people doing their kind of work. And rock stars will sometimes people please and say, "Oh wow, you see this in me. Yes, I guess I'll be a leader. That wasn't anything I was ever thinking of doing." And they will struggle in it. And so knowing if the people on your team are rock stars or superstars can help you know or gauge who might be a better fit to leading, because those rock stars, even though they're great, they value that stability and consistency. They want to be able to come in and do their work really well, be seen for their work, and then go and have a life, right? And so how are you ensuring that your rock stars and your superstars are both getting the support that they need? One being that superstars potentially getting that upward mobility, while those rock stars are getting that like awareness of the good work that they're doing. All right. So when you start to think about putting a leadership team together, because a lot of you, in the couple of questions that I've heard so far, have like a clinical director or a site supervisor. And so you have someone in leadership. And I like to think of a team as something different than having a couple of people who are leading something. A leadership team means that those leaders are working together for common goals, right? For common outcomes. If you have individual people in leadership and they're not a team, they're likely working in silos, where they are focused on their own leadership, their own expectations, their own job, like whatever it is that they're expected to do, they're focusing on that and leading in that capacity only. A leadership team will start to collaborate and work together. And that's really what I think is at the basis of feeling successful as a group practice owner and being able to start to step back and step into the visionary role is when you have a leadership team that is cohesive and working together. So some of the things that help in creating that leadership team cohesion, one is creating a leadership manual. You likely already have an employee manual and an operations manual, but having a leadership manual that talks over some of those leadership related protocols, like what's your protocol on providing PIPs? When should PIPs be given? Performance improvement plans. The difference between pipping and coaching someone first, termination and resignation protocols, leadership team meetings and what those expectations are during those leadership team meetings. Any sort of on-call expectations, if you have them. I know some leaders will have on-call, especially clinical leaders might have some on-call if like a clinician on their team has a crisis. Who are they, who are they getting in contact with? What is the protocol for that in your practice? Any sort of recruiting, interviewing, and hiring practices, especially related to leadership, those might be some of the things you want to put into your leadership manual. 2 is providing a structure for your leaders to connect. So again, getting out of the silos, the independent spaces, and making sure that they have a lot of time in their schedule to connect with each other and to get support from each other. One, like I said, it removes the silo and brings cohesion. But the second thing that happens is that it takes away responsibility from you, where they're constantly defaulting to you when they have questions, and they can start defaulting to each other for some questions and getting feedback. It really like brushes up on that leadership skill when they don't have you to constantly fall back on when they are unsure about a leadership decision that they might need to make. When they have other leaders to brainstorm with and be like, I'm having this issue, what would you do? Or what is your feedback? They're getting more brains to get support from than just mine. And I always say, like, I'm not the be all end all and knower of all things. My leadership team has a lot more skill and knowledge in different areas than I would. And so being able to provide that space where they're intentionally able to connect with each other, so that they're able to take that away from you, helps with empowering and collective decision making, which I really love. And I think has been the biggest, um, like the thing that has created the is reduced burnout for me is creating cohesion among my leadership team, because there was a time for me where I had a handful of leaders, but they all individually kept coming to me whenever they had an issue, and I always felt like I'm still like constantly on, even though I'm paying leaders leadership rates. And it wasn't until I created this cohesion among them where a big load was like taken off my shoulders. Providing learning opportunities, so giving them time in their calendar to engage in leadership education. I pay for that. Part of their salaries includes a couple of hours a week for them to read, gain knowledge, and I think a lot of practice owners forget to incorporate that and don't pay for that kind of time. And I really think that's important because even you and I will consistently grow in our leadership skills, and we probably spend time like you are right now in this training. And if you want your leaders to grow like you are, providing them space where they can be paid to learn, is going to be, I don't know, it's one of the biggest things that my leadership team now says they love about working at Urban Wellness is that they're given opportunities to learn and grow in their leadership skill while like on the job, so to speak. And then sharing of power. So actively looking at how decision making is really happening in your business. And it's going to look a little different for all of us. How you want to share power with your leadership team might look different than how I share power. I share full power, meaning, as an example, when my leadership team had an open site supervisor position 5 or 6 years ago, two candidates, two clinicians in my practice both applied for the position. I and my integrator, the person who is like my ride or die, we both thought, because we collectively decide as a leadership team who gets to be in that position after they do interviews and stuff. I'm not the final decision maker. That's how much I share power. It's a collective in my business, in my group practice. And so out of the 7 leaders, we all said after the interviews were done who we thought would be the best fit for that site supervisor role. I said one person, and my clinical director or my executive director said the same person, and all 5 of the other people picked that other person. That person was the one who got the position because I shared, that's the level of power sharing that I have in my business, is where even if it's not exactly the decision I would make. I trust my leadership team, and I've worked at building that trust and letting mistakes happen so that they can, that's how we all learn, right? We learn by falling. That's the type of decision, power sharing that I do in my business. And you have to be able to look inward and decide what does sharing power, because of course, if you have a leadership team, you have to share some amount of power. What is that going to look like for you? Ooh, all right. I'm actually towards the end. I didn't think I was going to go so fast.
Oh,
So,
this is great because you've got
yep,
questions.
questions. I saw them popping up, and I'm like, she's not telling me any questions. So I'm assuming at the end. If you guys want more trainings, I have like hundreds of trainings for group practices in the exchange. I have a little promo code, um, 50 off 25. If you want to join, you can use the QR code up here. And that's that. But yeah, let's answer some questions.
All right, brilliant. Okay. Let's see. I want to pick the ones that are relevant to the entire group.
Yeah.
So, well, here's one that came up early on when you mentioned that you have a CFO overseeing your finance. What would be the job requirements that that person should have that they should look for when they're looking for their CFO?
Um, so someone who has like the financial credentials, I find that unless you have 100-person practice or more, you're not going to need a full-time like in-house person for the financial leadership role, for HR leadership even. And so I like to look for what's called fractional human resources, fractional CFO. Fractional just means that they use a fraction of their time to support you. So if you Google fractional CFO, you'll find tons of companies where that is what their role is to be a CFO in a fractional sense, meaning a fraction of their time. And that's what their job is to be a fractional CFO in lots of businesses. I use Green Oak Accounting because their specialty is working it with group practices, mental health group practices, and they offer fractional CFO support. And so literally almost every decision I make, if it has anything to do with money, I'm not making it by myself. I'm asking for feedback from my CFO. I use Nikki Ramirez at hranswers.org. She is a fractional HR consultant. Her business, she has a HR business where she provides HR fractional support for small businesses like ours. So yeah, that's you want to find someone who that's what their credentials are, is to be a fractional CFO. You don't want to have someone who's just got like bookkeeping experience, because bookkeeping is just one piece of the money pie, right? Someone who can lead in the finance department, like a CFO, will be able to lead, manage, and be accountable to the finances of your business. When it ebbs and flows, they're able to see that the reason that your guys' income in your practice went down the past 2 months was that your clinical director fired 3 people. And so now your revenue is, of course, down. And they're checking in with the clinical director saying, hey, I noticed that 3 people left in the past month. What's the plan for hiring the 3 or 4 more people? They're literally not just like, here's the finances, here's your profit and loss statements. That's not leading, right? If they're sharing, which is most likely what most of us have, is someone who shares your profit and loss statements every month and gives it to you, and then you have to interpret it and decide something with it. A fractional CFO will do that, but then they will tell you what needs to happen, what needs to change.
Okay, that's a great answer. From Susan, she's asking, is there a tipping point for a practice size or income level where adding leadership makes sense? Is there a first position to add for most practices?
No, like I said in the towards the beginning of the training, the who you're going to add into a leadership position is really going to depend on, I like to look at what is your skill set, where do you have the most skill, and what areas of leadership do you feel like you're flailing underwater, where you don't have skill set in that area, and that's likely going to be the first leadership position that I would suggest letting go of. So for me, I mentioned I did not want to do supervision. I didn't want to supervise people. It's not an area that I like or that I'm good at. And so for me, that role was the first leadership position I actually delegated. Whereas there's other people who love to provide supervision. And so, and maybe they just, are not into doing all the administrative and paperwork stuff. And so a head of admin was the first leadership position they might hire for. So the who, I would look inward at where are your skills? How are your skills being best used in those various leadership positions right now? And where could someone else be doing a whole hell of a lot better than you if you put someone into that position? That's likely the leadership position you want to delegate out first. And in terms of size, again, like I mentioned, what's your risk level? I brought someone into leadership when there was only one person for them to lead because I was being proactive. I will say, typically, when a person gets to around 10 clinicians, they will bring on their first like clinical leader person. Um, Again, it's like a bell curve, right? So some will be sooner, like I was, but I would say on average, if I look across the thousands of practice owners in the exchange, around 10 clinicians is where I see a lot of people start to bring on that first clinical leader position. Around 15 to 20, we start to see where they're starting to think of like leadership team, where they're bringing on an administrative leader, a fractional CFO. That tends to happen around the 20-person mark.
Awesome. That's great. Someone has asked what your thoughts are on clinicians preferring to remain independent contractors versus employees.
This is personal opinion, but I can share it. I am W-2 all the way person. I live in Illinois, and Illinois is a very employee law, like employee focused state. And so it's almost impossible to really have 1099s here, just as it is in like California and New York. So I would look in your state first and talk to an employment attorney to see if 1099 is even possible. There are some states where people still have 1099s. I find from a recruiting strategy, if we take away law part of it and you're in a state where it's okay. So in my state, it's guided. The decision's made for me. I don't get to make a decision on it because we have to have W-2s. But if we could decide on it, I would still choose W-2 because the culture and the climate of our industry right now is that people are wanting benefits. They need health insurance. They're wanting all those things, and those are things you can't give to 1099s.
Okay, that's great. Great insight. Are you able to share your pay structure for your leaders and staff? Do you use a percentage split comp or salary? And in case of the split comp, how do you factor in admin time?
Okay. That goes beyond my pay grade because I don't manage the day-to-day in my business. But I don't know all the pay levels and all that of the staff. My leadership team is salaried. And I mentioned this, I think, halfway through. They're salaried, base, and I split up how many clinical client-facing hours versus how many leadership hours they have. So we split that up based off of how large their location is that they're leading or managing. Um, so the more hours they end up having to spend, and we test it out when we first open a location, we'll test out how many hours we think they should be spending on leading. And then every 3 months for the first year, we check back in to see like, are you way over it? And if you are, what kind of things are you doing? Do we need to like help you time track a little bit better? Or were we way off about how many hours we anticipated you leading was? And do we need to like adjust how many clinical hours you're seeing clients for and adjust that down? So my leadership team is salary. They have a salary and it's split between it's not admin rate plus clinical rate. It's just one flat salary for hours worked. And so they are available for 30 hours. They're usually seeing around 15 to 20 client hour 15 to 20 client hours, and then the rest will be leadership based. And so some weeks they have shit hitting the fan, and so they're spending all of the extra. If they have 15 clinical hours, they might be spending 15 hours dealing with staff issues. And then there's other months where everything's smooth sailing and they might not even actually work the 30 hours. They might only do 5 hours of leadership because everyone's on vacation or things are going well. I like it like that because I want that fluidity.
Okay. Great. We have time for a few more questions. So someone just asked if you're able to go over some of the staffing woes or issues that you've been going through or have been through in the past. This person is in the process of hiring more clinicians, but they're not having as many people apply as they have been used to in the past.
Yeah. I'll tell you, and what you're saying is spot on with what I'm seeing with everyone else, which is hiring this past year, year and a half is very different and much more difficult than it was historically. Um, but I will say what's helped us was having a fractional HR person. So our HR person, and this is the job of any licensed human resources person, is that they have access to recruiting and hiring job boards that we don't necessarily have access to. So one of the places where we're really, I mean, I think we hired 7 people this month for May for the starting, did the interview process in April. They're starting in May. I think 7 people. We use Jazz HR. It's like a recruiting, I can't even explain it because again, I hire people to lead so that I don't have to be a part of everything. But they essentially, it's a platform that can like integrate itself into all of the typical job boards and other ones without you having to like put an ad on LinkedIn, put an ad on Indeed, put an ad in here, right? It Jazz HR and we get access to it because our HR person has her own access to it as an HR professional. It's an HR space or website, but it essentially can use it's a little algorithm and put our job ads in the right spaces without us like manually doing it based off of what we think, where we think people are applying. So I would say maybe checking in with an HR person. Again, if you do fractional, you can hire someone who just spends like 3 hours a month doing some HR stuff for you. But their 3 hours is like my 10 hours because I'm not an HR person. It's your 10 hours that they can get done in about 3 because that's their specialty. Um, so yeah, that I would say for recruiting, your recruiting part of the question is that there's some really cool tools out there that I think we wouldn't know to have access to because we don't have an HR person. Maybe looking into that. As for the woes, I think you asked about like woes. One of the big things that I'm learning in this, because again, as our industry shifts and changes, I'm literally learning what's happening with everyone else too, which is why I like to be in this visionary role, is that we're seeing a new generation of clinicians come in. Right? The newer, what is it, Gen Z is starting to come into the workforce. And with a new generation comes new expectations, new ways of working, and we need to shift how we lead to accommodate those things. And so I think a lot of the woes that I'm seeing and that other practice owners are talking about, a lot of it comes down to like a post-COVID plus new generation of people coming in and us leaders needing to shift what our own expectations of our employees are and how we lead so that we can lead better for that new generation.
That's great, Maureen. And we are almost up on time, but for some folks who joined today's session as sole proprietors who are really interested in breaking into group practice and taking on a lot of what you've covered today, I have a feeling that your exchange and your website gets into that and the logistics of how to do that and how to incorporate and how to grow sort of that front end, that early nascent stuff before you even get into what we covered today. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, I mean, my website and my podcast, there's a ton of like free stuff in there. I mean, you could build your practice with just that even.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you're obviously wanting more support, the membership has 3 different tracks, one for startups, one for scaling group practices, and one for visionary.
Okay, that's brilliant because I know that based on how I was positioning this session, people probably didn't know what exactly we were going to get today. And you went into so much great content. But for those who are still in the very early stages looking to get into what you're talking about here, let's have them check out your site. In fact, well, can I share these slides that you presented today? Is that some good? Because I was going to say, let's go back to that slide and y'all can take a screen grab. How about instead of that, when I send the follow-up email later today with the recording, I will also include a link to the slideware, and you can look at everything that Maureen covered, and you can see the coupon that she offered you as a special for joining us today. And you can get into the nitty-gritty and sign up for her list where you can learn everything you want to know and more. Maureen, thank you so much. This was incredibly insightful. Given by the sheer numbers of everyone who stayed on for the duration of this call, I'm thinking everyone got so much out of it. And thank you for that. I anticipate a lot of folks following up with you directly after this.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, folks. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and you'll hear from me shortly.
Bye.
Bye.